It's a pleasure to see people coming from so many places: Australia, Oklahoma, Connecticut, Indonesia, Italy, England. Welcome, one and all. As many of you may know, we're a small women-owned business based here in Massachusetts in the United States. And these community webinars are part of our vision to create a community of people worldwide who are interested in visual methods such as photo voice. We also provide trainings, we do consulting, and we do blogs, white papers, and other publications to share learning from around the globe by people who practice photo voice and other visual methods. You can reach us on these different channels, social media channels, and we thank our social media team for keeping those active. As many of you may know, photo voice was first coined by Carolyn Wong and Marianne Burris in the 1990s. And it's a participatory action research method where people who are often the subjects of research are instead participating as co-researchers in an effort to understand their perspectives, their lives, and support change at the community level as well as the personal and regional levels. With photo voice, this type of participatory methods, cameras are put in the hands of participants who are then empowered to share their point of view with others. And photo voice involves taking photos, reflecting on them individually and in groups, writing captions to go along with their photos in group discussions, and then sharing more widely, disseminating their findings with policymakers. Photo voice asks people to represent their lives, point of view, and experience using photographs and narratives. This is a visual depiction of a photo voice path. We find that very useful in our work to have that type of visual depiction. So today we're going to be hearing from Dr. Nicole Brown at the UCL Institute of Education. She's a lecturer in education and director of social research and practice and Education Limited. She gained her PhD in sociology at the University of Kent for her research into the construction of academic identity under the influence of fibromyalgia. She's published, edited books, and co-authored books, and she's currently authoring How to Make the Most of Your Research Journal. Her research interests are wide-ranging and include physical and material representations and metaphors. And I want to say that I recently attended in January the Qualitative Report Conference this year online, and the very last session of the conference, Dr. Brown was presenting on her framework that she'll be presenting on today. And it was, being the last session of that conference, often you don't have very many participants. And it seemed to me she was presenting on something that would be of great interest to our community. And we're very, very pleased that she agreed to present this free webinar today, and we welcome her now. I pass the baton to you, Nicole, and thank you and welcome everyone who's here today.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you everybody for being here. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. As Laura was saying, it was what we call the graveyard shift of that qualitative research report conference. Where a colleague and I, Dr. Jo Collins and I, presented on the systematic visuo-textual analysis, and that's what I'm going to do today as well. Just to say, I'm trying to be as interactive as possible, so I will be giving you a little bit of background and information initially, but there will be opportunities for you to discuss with one another in a breakout group and to actually try out the framework as well. Also, I would like to remind you that the chat function is there. I'm very lucky today to have several people monitoring the chat, so they will help me not to overlook and miss anything. But when it comes to the breakout group, you've also got the function of the Padlet, which I will introduce later. But there are two kind of ways for you to communicate your thoughts and your experiences of this framework. So to start off with, I would like to very quickly just build on what Laura was saying regarding the photo voice. We know that within the qualitative research recently, or in the last sort of decade, there has been a tremendous increase on arts-based approaches, on photo voices, on creative data collection. There are so many articles around that now that it's becoming obviously something that more mainstream. It's not as crazy out there anymore as it used to be in the 90s when it all started off. One of the things that we have found, or I have found in my own work though, was that there are many existing analytical frameworks to help us a little bit with analyzing some of the visual materials, but they don't necessarily look at the textual and the visual combined. So here is just a very brief overview, and just to sort of say that you don't need to read all of those details now. This is really just for your sort of perusal for later on, but to kind of embed my work somewhere so that you can see that it's not just coming out of thin air. And basically we were looking, Joe and I, we were looking specifically at the kinds of frameworks that have been used for trying to analyze visual data and textual data. And what we found was, if we're looking at those existing frameworks that are out there, there is a connection between the visual and the textual element, but that connection is always implicit. It's not brought out and it's not brought to the fore. The other thing is also that in many of these frameworks, the art or the artifact, whichever, the art as in the photograph or the piece of art, or the artifact, the object, the material representation, they are not considered as language in themselves. They are only considered as a stimulus for the conversation, or a way in to get people to talk about their experiences. And therefore, the frameworks are also not considering the arts, the artifacts, the production as something worthy of analysis. So in many ways, there is this kind of element of translation of the images into words. And then the analysis remains on the word. And therefore, there's something, well, we have found that there was something missing. And in many of those articles that we have read, the output or the creation wasn't actually used in the end as part of the analytical framework. It was used for data collection, but not at the stage of analysis. And this is really where the systematic visuo-textual analysis comes in. This is what I have been playing around with for a little while, and then I introduced my ideas to Jo Collins, and she played around with me. And I'm deliberately saying playing because our data collection involved a lot of Lego models, so it was literally playing and playfully engaging with our participants, and then trying to find ways of how we can actually analyze that in a systematic way. So what we have done is we've basically used the kind of existing analytical frameworks and looked at how they are analyzing the data. And we then started looking at, well, what do we actually do when we are analyzing ours, and how can we make that systematic and present it in a way that's a guideline for someone else to use as well. And this is what we've come up with. So what we are saying is that there is a level 1 of analysis, and then there is a level 2 of analysis. And we have split the visual, the textual into 2 different elements. And then we've got the visuo-textual element as an element 3 combined, the combination of the 2. So what we do is, we are on level 1, it's really just noticing and describing. So the analytical level is not as deep yet. At this stage, it's only just reading the text for linguistic features, use of words, phrases, structures. And in the artistic creation, in the artifact, we're looking at anything we notice about composition, use of color, space, any kind of artistic values that we can observe. And then we combine the visual and the textual to connect the two and actually try to identify which structures, which meanings, which expressions can we find. Now, at this stage, I would like to say that often when we are talking about this kind of analysis of the visual, a lot of people come back to me and say, I haven't been trained in that. I can't artistically analyze something, I'm not an artist. I can't analyze a piece of work in that way. Now, and how do I know that when I'm analyzing something, it's right and correct and not over-interpreted? Now, I would like to say at this stage, what kind of training have you received regarding the interpretation of the word? If we're going back to, yes, you've received training regarding the analytical framework, but not necessarily of whether you are reading too much into that text or that transcript of an interview that you've got in front of you. That is something that we just assume everybody knows how to do. We assume, because we are taught from childhood onwards, we're taught how to read and how to read between the lines and how to understand context and concepts through reading the text. We therefore assume people are able to interpret that kind of work with the text. So why don't we therefore make the assumption that we can do that with the visuals too? In my view, we can, because when we are looking at cartoons, at comics, when we're looking at art pieces in a museum, in a gallery, there are certain things that we can say. We can connect with what's in front of us. So to me, there is no difference in interpreting the visual and interpreting the textual in that sense. Once you have gone through that first level, you've kind of gone through the level 1 for the visual, for the textual, for the two combined. You then go back through the two basically to validate and check if what you have found on the visual-textual element, level 1, is replicated in the individual elements. So you go back through the textual, through the visual to kind of check back before you then enter level 2 of the analysis, which is then the conceptualization stage. At that point, you're talking about the essential elements that unite all of the artifacts, or that unite the different elements of the artifact in front of you. For the textual, this is where you are identifying patterns and themes. So, the kind of, in a way, finding the essential elements that unite the artifact is also a way of finding a pattern, finding a theme. And that's replicated in the textual, finding the pattern, finding the theme. And then you're moving into the visual-textual combined version again, where you're combining the artifact, the themes generated from the artifact and generated from the textual transcript, for example. And you see whether there is something that's coming out for you as a coherent narrative. And then again, you move back into the textual only, into the visual only, to kind of check whether your interpretation is verifiable in your data. Now, this sounds very, very theoretical at this stage, I know, which is why I'm trying to move into a more practical example. So I'm going to show you an example from my fibromyalgia study. This particular study used identity boxes as a data collection method. And the idea there was that I was asking participants a question, and in response to the question, they had to put the objects into a box. And once they had sent me the photograph of that week, I then released the next question and they had to add the objects in. So in this particular case, I had the project, which was 5 questions in total. And what you see here is an identity box of one participant after the five weeks, so after the 5 questions, after the final question. And what I did was, after the final question, I then actually started doing the visual analysis myself before I then arranged for an interview. Now, just to say, I did not actually call them interview. I do call them conversations. And in that conversation, we then explored a little bit about what people were saying in addition to what they sent in. How it worked in sort of normal circumstances was that individuals, participants, were sending me the photograph of that week with a little bit of a narrative around what they were sending me the photograph of. So this is where you've got this one image here, where with some of the text, as you can see, there is like in brackets, there it says photo B, also photo C. So you've got these kinds of extra photos that I was sent that are actually basically just zooming into what's on display here. So in this particular case, I had several data sets, because after each week I had a different box. So for each week I analyzed the visual, the textual, the combined, and then I checked that across all of the participants. What we've got here as an example at the noticing describing level, and I'm focusing specifically here now on the image rather than on the text. I will show you some highlights from the text later on, but let's start with just the visual elements first. So the first thing is about noticing. What struck me straight away was the final question was, what does life with fibromyalgia feel like? And in response to that, this particular participant had put a few objects on top of a tray and put the tray on top of the box. That is a significant observation for me to make, because all of the other objects, as you can see from previous weeks, they were all jumbled up in the box. But in that last question, what does life with fibromyalgia feel like? Something comes on top of everything else. And there's your significance. It is on top of everything else. So life with fibromyalgia is covering up everything else. Now, this is the kind of, initially on the noticing level, it's literally just noticing the tray is on top of the box. As you go through with the analysis, you then make sense of, well, what does that mean to have that tray on top of the box? People do not organize their photographs randomly in most cases. In some cases, yes, the photographs would have been organized randomly, but even if that was the case, the conversation was able to filter out how much of that randomness was actually in somehow unconscious choice. So there is still, even when you pointed out, well, actually, you did this with your box, people were then saying, actually, there's probably a reason for that. So people validated that kind of comment of mine in the conversation I had. To go back, just to kind of demonstrate to you how with this particular box and with this particular text, it worked on the systematic visual textual analysis. So on the element 1, the visual only, was obviously, like I said, the positioning of the object, of the tray on top of everything else. Linguistic and textual use of words and structures. This is obviously here, where we're going through some of the elements of the text that has come with it. And there's quite sort of strong words, like, for example, here, abrasive. So it was the steel wool is abrasive. That was one of the elements. It was also very interesting to notice how certain things were written. So it was so good not have to explain. The so is extremely emphasized, as is the not. So those are the kinds of elements that you notice at this particular level. When you go into the conceptualization stage, this is where I said to you, the tray covers everything else. It covers up the entire life. And when you then read the text, it says here, oops, sorry, I've moved that now. It says here, living with fibromyalgia has become the primary concern in my daily life and most likely for the rest of it. So what I have observed in that the tray covers everything, that is replicated in the textual analysis. So that's capturing that theme and therefore making that connection between, this actually, it overpowers everything, it covers everything. It's more important than anything else. That's therefore a validated conclusion to draw. I hope that this is kind of helping here. What I would like to do is, again, I'm quite aware that there's a lot to take in here, and that this is kind of a lot of information as well. I would like you to have an opportunity to talk to each other for, let's say, 15-20 minutes, or a little bit more than 15 minutes, to basically use the next slide, and I will share a link with you where you can download that very easily in a second. This is a photograph and a little bit of text. As you will see, there are less objects and there's less text, so that you can talk through it more quickly. Basically, that's why I have chosen this one specifically. This comes out of a project which was also about the experience, and that was about the lived experience of disabilities and chronic illnesses in higher education. So it's not directly from the fibromyalgia study, which is why the photograph looks different, but it's a similar kind of context where it is about the illness experience and the experience of disability. Yeah, okay, I'm back now. I'm sorry, somebody muted me here. I may have done that myself, and I apologize. So again, this is from the lived experience of disabilities and chronic illnesses. And what I would like you to do in your breakout groups is to use the details from the slide, which I will share with you, and to apply the framework, but then also to discuss these questions. What does it feel like to analyze the data using this particular systematic visuo-textual analysis? In how far is the analytical process the same or different to other analytical frameworks that you usually use? And what do you think are the benefits and drawbacks of this particular framework? As I said to you, there is a link to a Padlet as well. You can use the link to the Padlet to share some of your thoughts. For those of you who would like to put it in the chat box later, you feel free to do that too. The advantage of the Padlet is that you can type as you're discussing in your meetings. So I'm sharing here in the chat box the PDF for you to download with the instructions for the breakout group, and separately the Padlet link, although that is also in the PDF anyway, but just to be sure that you've got all of the details there. What I'm going to do now is creating the breakout groups. I'm doing it so that there will be about 2 or 3 people in the breakout group, so you've got a nice comfortable group that you can work with. And ideally you'll be able to share obviously your sound, but perhaps you are also able to share the video to make it a little bit more easier to talk to one another. And I will call you back in about 15 minutes. Opening all rooms now. So welcome back. It's good to have you back in the room. Please do continue to kind of use the Padlet and the chat box for any comments or questions you may have. One thing that I would like to say at this stage, there was a comment from just before I sent everybody into the breakout groups, where the comment says, I'd be interested to see the instructions you send to the participants for this task. This is about the identity box task. How to ensure participants put sufficient effort into the tasks. We are cautious of overburdening participants with tasks outside of interviews, so try to make the instructions as simple as possible. However, sometimes it does feel like the photos they take for photo elicitation interviews aren't fully thought through and rushed. I'm cautious of over-interpreting these photos and their meaning composition and the risks of seeing meaning where the meaning is not intended or not really there. So first of all, thank you very much for this comment. And I really agree with what you're saying. There is something there about, like providing sufficient support without being leading. That's obviously also a potential pitfall, that we're too leading in the kinds of things we're asking. Now, in this particular case, I was working with people with fibromyalgia, and one of the things that I have found that was before I started the research, in fibromyalgia support groups, a lot of the time people did not feel comfortable trying to describe what they feel like. So they used metaphors, they used memes, they used images, they used emojis. So there was a lot of visual communication as part of that particular group of people. That is because the fibromyalgia experience is so elusive and so difficult to describe and explain that people tapped into other means and ways of communicating. My research, therefore, was only using what people used in their natural environments anyway. So that makes a massive difference. It wasn't trying to put extra work on them, because that was already the way they were communicating. Similarly, with the bag image that I showed you, that was again something where I just said, I opened it up to the participants to say, if there is anything you would like to communicate with me in any way, shape or form, let me know, let me have it. Some people sent in poetry or a song list, or other people sent in narratives, you know, like diary entries, all sorts of different things. And this particular person, there were a number of them that actually sent in photographs, and this particular person also sent in a photograph. Again, it was me tapping into their preferred way of communication, and I think that makes a massive difference from the outset. The other thing also, in terms of kind of how I present my task, I'm sharing with you a clip, a YouTube link. Feel free to cut and paste that into your private area and watch it later. It's nothing special. It's literally just me talking to the camera and explaining what I'm after. And this is of one of the tasks, and it's only a 1.5 minute clip. And again, this was the most natural way of communicating with people, rather than trying to explain things via email. So that's something that I have found worked the best for me. In terms of over-interpreting, I can see why you'd be worried, because if something has been rushed, then perhaps you're over-interpreting it. I understand that concern. However, I don't know whether you're taking photographs yourself in your own free time, using your own social media accounts, your own smartphone. Ask yourself, go back over your own photographs that you have taken, even those, the ones that you have taken in a rush, and ask yourself whether there is anything there that would be over-interpreting. And I'm asking you to do this as a task, as an exercise, because you will find that, yes, okay, there may be somebody else over-interpreting in a particular way, but like you are member checking with interviews, you can member check with what you have found in those photographs. So the over-interpretation, although actually in many ways we're not over-interpreting, in many ways we are quite accurate with our interpretations, there is still an opportunity to member check. One of the things that a lot of people are saying to me with the very individual objects and the Lego models, people are saying, well, how can you make sense of a pattern? How can you find a pattern if it's that individual? Now, I'm going back to the photo that I showed you with the tray on top of the box. That person was not the only one that put something on top of the box. So in this case, it was a tray. In another case, it was a pillow. In another case, it was a blanket. It was something that quite many of them actually did. Every person thought that this was something unique to them, but actually it wasn't that unique once you started looking at it. The same is with the Lego models. Whilst each individual Lego model looks very different from the next, there are certain patterns and symbols and signs that are communal to quite a lot of them. And that's the same, that's how the interpretation actually works on that level. I have got obviously quite a lot of comments and questions now. So I'm hoping to be able to answer some of the questions and concerns that you have. I don't know whether somebody can help me pick out questions that are particularly pertinent or you know, that you would like to have answered, because obviously I'm finding it difficult to read everything at the same time.
Yes.
So it would be really helpful to have a little bit of help.
All right. Okay. Is this just, you applied this to one photo here for our example, but it sounds like you've also applied it across photos
Yes.
and text. Yes. And
yes, thank you. Yes, so how I do it is when I have a research project with say 10, 15, 20 participants, and everybody sends me their identity box, their photographs, whatever it is, I will analyze the data per person, and then I will check against each other the data set. So the framework that I've used is then for each person plus for each Lego model or for each photograph. So it is a way of actually making it systematic. And I think one of the things that I should say here, and I'm going to share my screen, I'm jumping ahead a little bit on the slides, but I would like you to see this. This is a visual representation of how the framework works. So at the top, you've got the weave of somebody taking every single element, every single level really carefully. You go through level 1, you go through the visual, you go through level 1, the textual, you go through the combined. You then move back again through each stage, and then you move into level 2, and you move into the next kind of stage and come back again. Now, if I was to leave out some of the elements, as you can see here, there is still some kind of systematic approach to it. So if you're not doing that analysis for every single participant, you're losing out somewhere, you're leaving some step out here. It's still, in a way, systematic, but it's obviously less robust than if you did it in that particular way, which is why I try to actually analyze all of the elements at all of the stages against for each person, and then against the group.
Thank you so much. Another question here was perhaps why the individual didn't, or what's the significance at least of not including a photo ID card or credit cards or money, you know, the kinds of other things that might have gone in the bag. Is that even?
So we had questions as to why other information was not included in the photo. Oh, okay. In case the person did become ill when the bus needed. Oh, okay. So to be honest, you know, some of the information that people are sharing, sometimes they're only choosing to share what they think is relevant and important. So that's a very, very important element to kind of say. So at the moment, for example, I've got a handbag project where I'm looking at identities and memories as played out through the handbag, and I'm basically just asking participants to share their handbag with me. Now, obviously, they are selective. They may be sharing literally everything that's in that handbag, but they may also pick certain things that they are not willing to share. And that's the prerogative of the person. Now, I know that somehow we tend to treat that differently from textual and interview data, but actually there is no difference. How can we know that in the interview, the person gives you all the details and all the data? We don't. They may hold back on some information. And that's the same here. It's probably in the visual, it's probably more obvious when certain things are withdrawn from us and withheld from us. But actually, some of the time, they do that in interviews too, and that's fair enough too, in a way.
Rose, would you please be sure to mute people? Thank you. There's another question here. What software tools do you use to capture your analysis?
Yes, so I do use NVivo because that's the license that my institution has bought into. And that's you know, the kind of the trademark sort of software that you use. However, I'll be honest with you, I'm actually a more of a pen and paper person. So I tend to write notes and post-it notes and stickers and cut and paste with scissors and highlighting markers. So I tend to go at analysis from a quite old-fashioned sort of way, an old-fashioned point of view. But also I do use creative methods for analysis as well. So if I have seen a number of photographs of a particular project, I will actually start playing around with materials, objects, arts and crafts in different ways as well. Actually, I can show you, I've got one piece here, which is sort of a painting that I have drawn on the basis of a project where people were talking about the experience of disability, where you have a public face and a private face. And this is how I then made sense of that, the public and the private, the two things, the pretty public face and the private one. That's quite disturbing, actually. So I'm not showing you the full painting, it's not quite done yet, but this is kind of a way of also making sense of that data. So I do use traditional coding, and I use the framework with writing notes, but I also use artistic, creative ways of creating analysis too.
And there's another comment here I think you might want to address, is that someone noted that photos can lie. And, you know, what does that mean to you?
Yes, so that is something that's really important, the sense of ownership over things. So I'll be honest, when I started out with the identity box, I had this great idea that I was going to ask people to send me their boxes once they are completed, and I'd be reimbursing them for the articles that they had put into their boxes, and I was going to use that for an exhibition. Now, the first boxes came in, the first question was, who are you? And a lot of the people had put in marriage certificates, wedding rings, passports. So clearly, very early on, it emerged that I'm not going to be able to have those boxes. I can replicate them with my own objects at home, but I can't actually ask people to give up their boxes. In terms of ownership over the photograph, again, the photograph is, and as far as I'm concerned, belongs to the person, but I do ask them if it's okay to share. Now, some of the people come back and say they would rather not have their photographs shared. Some of the photographs, I'm not even asking if I'm sharing them or not, because it's very obvious that people would be identifiable, so I'm not sharing them in public. I use them for analytical purposes, but I'm not sharing them. But those that I share are the ones that I have actually agreed, and I've got the license, if you like, to share. But like you said, I do think that actually there is something that about using creative methods and photos and objects where we have to be careful as to who actually owns this. And I think that's a deeper question for participatory research in general, because then the question is, who owns the research? So that's it. There is a lot of ethical questions that you have to negotiate. In that sense, I do use ethics as a process. I buy into the idea of relational ethics, as Carolyn Ellis is also promoting, and that's something that's working for me. So I actually, at all stages, will always check back, is it still okay to do this? Are you still happy to continue with this project? Are you still happy for me to share? So that's something that I constantly check, and it's constantly negotiating with people, which obviously does mean that that is something that is perhaps more time consuming, but it also means that you're able to build a really nice relationship with your participants, and as they start trusting you, you get more interesting data too.
True enough. One more question. Someone is asking about, what's the main difference between thematic analysis and content analysis?
Okay, so many analytical frameworks are very closely related, and the boundaries are becoming more difficult to discern. So that needs to be said right at the beginning. Thematic analysis usually is about identifying themes and patterns, and identifying a particular theme that's kind of coming out for you. Content analysis is a different way of how you get to those themes, and this is more to do with coming out of traditionally, and I think this is the thing, I think you have to go back to the beginning as to where did those analytical frameworks start. The thematic analysis is something that comes from psychology, where they were just looking at themes and what people were talking about, especially in how Brown and Clark are using it. The content analysis comes out as a sidestep, if you like, from discourse analysis, which is a linguistic approach. So it's more to do about the language, about the how and the process, rather than the theme as such. And that's kind of the main difference. But it's really hard. And I think that's probably one of the difficulties that we have with any kind of framework. Is like, to decide which one is appropriate to use. And this is why I'm trying to say, I've got this analysis framework here. That's not actually saying you have to do it in this particular way. This is just giving you an opportunity to be systematic in how you make sense of that data. Whether you analyze the textual through thematic analysis or through discourse analysis is entirely up to you. It still works. And that for me is the kind of the benefit of that particular work that I've been doing.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm noticing you might have time for a couple of pages, questions. So here's another one. Do you also interview the participants after analyzing their photo and narrative, or as part of your analysis?
Yes. So it depends on the project. It's very, very different for each project that I've got on hand. With some projects like the identity box, I was very conscious that I needed to have interviews because that was part of my PhD work, and it was located in sociology. And there are specific disciplinary conventions that you can't bypass. So I needed to have interviews with that particular project. With the handbag project, at the moment, I'm just getting people to send me their handbags. And I'm not even asking for any kind of commentary on it or at all. I did say to people that I will be having a conversation with them, and then they can share with me whatever they want. We're not necessarily going to be talking about the handbag at all. I'm going to be asking the opening question on the handbag project will be something along the lines of, can you tell me about your identity? Because that's the focus of that particular project. So and then people can bring in the handbag if they would like to, or they don't. That's entirely up to them. But basically how I approach my interviews, as I say, I keep calling them conversations. I'm looking to Brinkman and Qualitative sort of an analogy or metaphor that they use of being a data traveler. And that means that as an interviewer, you are traveling alongside your participant to make sense together of that data. I'm not a data miner, which is the kind of person that would be sitting there and just siphoning off the knowledge of their participants. I'm not saying that that's wrong. In many projects, that is the way to go, and it needs to be that way. For me personally, I'm interested in being a data traveler and making sense of experiences together and having conversations. So I try to build that in as much as I can, but that's a personal choice.
Thank you. And I know you have a few more slides to go through, so perhaps this is the moment.
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying because it's 10:56 and I know.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much
right.
for helping me out with the questions and that. That's been really, really helpful. Also, I'm going to make sure that I have a copy of the comments and the questions. So if there's anything that I haven't answered, I will try and answer them in email and try and share that through an email that, later on. What I wanted to say, kind of to sum up, was really just about the systematic visuo-textual analysis. It's not a philosophical or theoretical approach. Like I said, it can work with any kind of thematic analysis, content analysis, discourse analysis, narrative analysis. It's basically just a framework of making that kind of process systematic. It is bounded in some way in phenomenological, metaphorical, embodied understanding of human communication, because it basically foregrounds that language is not the only way how we communicate, that we communicate through metaphors, through photographs, through our embodiment. And it's, as you have seen, which is what I've shown kind of here with that already, it's a very cyclical spiral dynamic process. There is constant going through, weaving your way through your data. And that means that you have to develop a particular stance, which is a critical reflexive openness, in that you're critical about the kind of judgments that you're making, and you're reflexive about the judgments that you're making, but at the same time be open to what the data brings to you. So in terms of concluding reflections, it is really about subjectivity, and it brings to the fore the person and the personal experiences of the researcher, because it's the researcher that makes the connections between the visual and the textual. It's the researcher that brings their knowledge to the images. There is a rigor of analysis between the levels of an elements, which is represented in the weave. And like I said, at the end of the day, you can leave out steps. It just makes it a little bit less rigorous. But this is a way of combining systematically the visual and the textual data. One last thing I should say, on this kind of scheme that we've got here, element 1 is the visual only, element 2 is the textual only. That is because in most of the frameworks that I have come across, the visual is actually kind of, you know, almost dropping off the grid. And I was trying to foreground that the visual and the textual need to take equal weight. So if you were to start this analysis with the textual only and then bring in the visual, you just swap over the two columns, that would work fine too. So at the end of the day, there are some references here as well, which you know, you're going to get when you have the slides as well. And here are the details of how you can contact me as well. I'm more than happy to answer any further questions or to be available again. But I hope that this has been an introduction to something that's, I mean, to me, this is really exciting, and you know, it's a nice way of actually making sure that we're accounting for all of the data that we receive from our participants.
Mm. And Nicole, we want to thank you, or Dr. Brown, I should say, we want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today and this framework, something that is so important. And it's wonderful that you'll be publishing your paper on it in April.
Yes,
And
so it has already been, yes, thank you, Laura. It has already been accepted. It will come out on, I think, the 26th of April, the qualitative report, and it will be therefore open access. So it'll be available to everybody to read then.
yes, and we'll share that on social media. So if you are following us, you'll hear about it right then. And thank you all for being here today. And we look forward to seeing you in the future, we hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for your
Right.
time too. Thank you.
Thank you.